Hey, good evening, everyone, and Merry Christmas to everyone who is celebrating. We were supposed to have an episode on Atlantis this weekend, but we keep postponing that episode, and I'm sorry for that. I'm hoping somewhere in January or February, latest March, we'll finally have that episode. The outline is already covered. I've read the book that I bought, but we keep postponing that episode. So hopefully that will happen soon. Um, I could have skipped an episode for tonight, but I wanted to keep quote unquote spoiling my audience by having an episode every week, every weekend. And since the guest canceled for our Atlantis episode recently, I don't have much time to prepare anything. So I was reading the book of Apocrypha. It's called the Complete Apocrypha. This is from 2018, I believe. There's 2022 edition, which covers more books. But basically, these are what we call the intertestamental books that came between the Old and New Testament. So what we call in Protestantism the 400 years of silence is not called the same in Catholic and Orthodox branches of faith because they have this extra number of books in their Old Testament canon, which are usually not seen by the Jewish believers as divinely inspired, but still very useful for teaching, correction, and just for the tradition. So, in Eastern Orthodox and Catholic canon of the Old Testament, these books are included, but in Protestant Bibles, they're not. And many believers in Protestant branch of faith are not familiar with these books. Um, I read slash skimmed about 60 pages for from four different apocrypha yesterday, and I wanted to read a few, but that's depending on how much my throat will allow me. So I apologize for that in advance. So you have to be patient with me. I have coffee, I have water, so we'll be doing this slowly. Also, I want to encourage everyone, if you didn't read the apocrypha, do yourself a favor, you can get them online for free, but you can also buy a book. Like I said, this is just one of them. It's not expensive, and you can enjoy. I found yesterday while I was reading these 60 pages, I found myself enjoying and seeing so much of the Old Testament and wisdom implemented in these four books, but also a lot of pre-Jesus and pre-Paul commandments and just overall wisdom that I just saw them as beautiful. So I would just encourage you guys to read them. Okay, so when it comes to the Book of Wisdom, the alternative name is called the Wisdom of Solomon. Um, and let me give you a quick background info. The Book of Wisdom was written as late as 50 years before the coming of Christ. Its author, whose name is not known to us, was probably a member of the Jewish community at Alexandria in Egypt. He wrote in Greek in a style pattern on that of Hebrew verse. At times he speaks in the person of Solomon, placing his teachings on the lips of the wise king of Hebrew tradition in order to emphasize their value. Of course, we will not be covering everything because it will take me days. I want to read from several passages where I found supernatural aspects. So everything we'll be touching on tonight will have to have some supernatural aspects. So wherever I found this passages that talk about idols, gods, demons, watchers, fallen angels, anything of that sort, I just wanted to read for you. Okay, so let's go to Wisdom chapter 11. That will be our first pit stop. Okay. Verses 15 to 19. So this is God speaking. Wherever I was able to understand the context to whom the God was addressing to, because sometimes he would address certain passages to his people, but sometimes to in regard to the Jewish enemies. Most of the time, it had to do with the Exodus, so it's Egypt. But sometimes, as we'll see in this context, it has to do with the in the next chapter, it has to do with another tribe, with another nation. Okay, so Wisdom 11, verses 15 to 19. But in return for the senseless imaginings of their unrighteousness, wherein they were led astray to worship irrational reptiles and wretched vermin, you sent upon them a multitude of irrational creatures for vengeance, that they might learn that by what things a man sins, by these he is punished. For your all-powerful hand that created the world out of formless matter didn't lack means to send upon them a multitude of bears, fierce lions, or newly created and unknown wild beasts. This is very interesting. Newly created and unknown wild beasts, full of rage, either breathing out a blast of fiery breath or belching out smoke. So the author of the Book of Wisdom is not known. He sometimes, as we said, he's sometimes portraying himself as the Solomon himself, which will be impossible because this book came out about 50 years before Jesus. But could something from the Book of Wisdom uh, be passed orally before the author sat down to write, and then on top of that he added his own wisdom and other tradition? That is very possible, right? But what struck me so much in Wisdom 11, what was the verse? Yeah, 18 again, is that the author is mentioning these animals or beasts. He said they're breathing out a blast of fiery breath or belching out smoke. So could it be? I mean, I don't think he was talking about dinosaurs, because some type of dinosaurs had these abilities. Was this a metaphor? It doesn't look like, because based on the context, everything that he talks about seems to be very real. So what were the animals that he speaks of that were breathing fire or belching out smoke? Because we know that some animals, especially insects, they have this ability. Hey, Merry Christmas to you too, Dane. Thank you, brother. If you want to join us, let me know, so I'll have someone to talk with. Yeah, so as we know that there's some types of animals, not just the dinosaurs, but also insects, that have these abilities to, the way God designed them, to uh, create through certain chemicals in their bodies to create something like fire or explosion, right? We know these bugs that are able to do this. So we don't know what the author was what he meant when he said that these animals were breathing fire. But listen to this last part. This is even more interesting. He said that there were also some other type of animals were flashing dreadful sparks from their eyes. So what could these be? I don't know about you, but when I came to this section, flashing dreadful sparks from their eyes, this reminded me, I know some of you will be laughing, but this reminded me of Mothman. So this doesn't seem anymore like a regular animal. This almost sounds like a spirit animal, which we covered several times lately on the channel, right? So again, either breathing out a blast of fiery breath, or belching out smoke, or flashing dreadful sparks from their eyes. So God would use these animals that may seem evil, that may seem, um, you know, well, they didn't just seem, they were dangerous. They can come and take your life, but God is still above them in his supremacy, in his majesty. God uses these animals the same way he could have commanded Leviathan, the animal of the chaos, right? But God could still command Leviathan whatever to do. And for me, that was amazing. So, or flashing dreadful sparks from their eyes, which had power not only to consume them by their violence, so the animals or these beasts to consume people by their violence, but to destroy them even by the terror of their sight. So these animals or these beasts, again, I'm just speculating. I'm not saying they were spirit animals. Well, at least some of these. But they were so formidable, they were so scary that if you would just look at them, you'll be already like shaking and being paralyzed and you'll die. I just found this very interesting, Very interesting, because in this context, God is still talking about his people, or the person the author is speaking, how God was using different tools or different means to punish his people. In next chapter, we'll cover first verses 3 to 7. And this is, in my understanding, context. Now, God is talking about Canaanites. Okay, so verses 3 to 7, chapter 12. For truly the old inhabitants of your holy land, hating them because they practice detestable works of enchantments and unholy rites, merciless slaughters of children, and sacrificial banquets of man's flesh and of blood. This is already insane. The latter part, um, banquets of man's flesh and of blood, just reminds me of Genesis 6 and of the Enochian tradition of the giants. When they couldn't find food anymore, they turned out to kill and eat people. I don't know actually if this was in the book of Enoch or in the book of Giants, but either or. And it's interesting how the author mentions now in chapter 12 of a book of wisdom about Canaanites, merciless slaughter of children, merciless, because as we know, they were sacrificing children to their fallen god Moloch, right? They were put him on these burning statues, idol statues, and children will be burned and therefore dedicated to their fallen god Moloch. So again, merciless slaughters of children and sacrificial banquets of man's flesh and of blood, allies in an impious fellowship, and murderers of their own helpless babes. It was your counsel to destroy by the hands of our fathers. Sometimes people, believers or skeptics, but mostly skeptics, they see God in the Old Testament as very cruel and almost merciless, very judgmental, as a bully. But I mean, if you're honest with yourself, as much as the author of Wisdom, the Book of Wisdom was, God had to simply step into history and say, no more. I will have to punish you for your sin. And remember, God gave them 400 years to repent for practicing idolatry, doing the occult, sacrificing babies. So God had to come. And why God had to intervene? So not just to prevent the slaughter of the innocent ones, but it also says in verse 7 that the land which in your sight is most precious of all might receive a worthy colony of God's servants. So God was preparing the land for his people, right? When theocracy is about to be established. So this is verses 3 to 7. We're sticking to same chapter now, verses 23 to 27. Okay. Why also the unrighteous that lived in folly of life you tormented through their own abominations? For truly they went astray very far in the ways of error, taking as gods those animals which even among their enemies were held in dishonor, showing you that Canaanites were more evil and more wicked than other pagan, godless um, civilizations of that time. And they were deceived like foolish babes. Therefore, as to unreasoning children, you sent your judgment to mock them. But those who would not be admonished by a mocking correction as of children will experience a judgment worthy of God. For through the sufferings they were indignant of, being punished in these creatures, which they supposed to be gods. So the heathens, the pagans of those days, and I think history is repeating, they see creation as divine. They think of themselves as divine. They see, they call the planet Mother Earth and almost see it as some form of a goddess. But also, people in this time see these creatures as gods with small g, right? They saw and recognized as the true God, him whom they refused to know. So at the end, when God punished them and stepped in, they saw that there's God of gods. There's the true God with capital G. Therefore, also the result of condemnation came upon them. Okay, when it comes to chapters 13 and 14, I think I'll be reading everything. And chapter 13 is especially interesting. You'll soon find out why. Okay, so chapter 13. For truly all men who had no perception of God, they were vain by nature and didn't gain power to know Him who exists from the good things that are seen. They didn't recognize the architect from his works. Does this sound familiar? But they thought that either fire or wind or swift air or circling stars or raging water or luminaries of heaven were gods that ruled the world. If it was through delight in their beauty that they took them to be gods, let them know how much better their sovereign Lord is than these, for the first author of beauty created them. I hope you're starting to recognize Romans 1 in this chapter. And again, this came before the time of Paul and New Testament. But if it was through astonishment as their power and influence, then let them understand from then how much more powerful he who formed them is. For from the greatness of the beauty of created things, mankind forms the corresponding image of their Maker. But yet for these men there is but small blame, for they too perhaps go astray while they are seeking God and desiring to find Him. For they diligently search while living among His works, and they trust their sight that the things that they look at are beautiful. But again, even they are not to be excused, for if they had power to know so much, that they should be able to explore the world, how is it that they didn't find the sovereign Lord sooner? And again, so much Romans 1. But miserable were they, and in their things were their hopes, who called them gods, which are works of men's hands, gold and silver, skillfully made, and likeness of animals, or a useful stone, the work of an ancient hand. Yes, and if some woodcutter, having sawn down a tree that is easily moved, skillfully strips away all its bark, and fashioning it in attractive form, makes a useful vessel to serve his life's needs. Burning the scraps from his handiwork to cook his food, he eats his fill. Taking a discarded scrap which served no purpose, a crooked piece of wood, and full of knots, carves it with the diligence of his idleness, and shapes it by the skill of his idleness. He shapes it in the image of a man, or makes it like some paltry animal, smearing it with something red, painting it red, and smearing over every stain in it. Having made a worthy chamber for it, he sets it in a wall, securing it with iron. He plans for it that it may not fall down, knowing that it is unable to help itself, for truly it is an image and needs help. This reminds me of in the Old Testament. Oh my God, it's so funny. I love that passage of the Old Testament when the statue of Dagon falls down. It falls down in God's presence. It falls down twice, and the second time, um, the torso, right, of the statue of Dagon, fallen god, false god, is destroyed because it's unable to do anything, just like this passage is saying. When he makes his prayer concerning goods and his marriage and children, he's not ashamed to speak to that which has no life. So pagans are not ashamed to speak to their so-called gods and idols and to pray for them, to pray to them. Yes, for health, he calls upon that which is weak. For life, he implores that which is dead. For aid, he supplicates that which has no experience. For a good journey, he asks that which can't so much as move a step. And for profit in business and good success of his hands, he asks ability from that which has hands with no ability. Again, this is so powerful. Okay, now we're switching to chapter 14, the next one. Again, one preparing to sail and about to journey over raging waves calls upon a piece of wood more rotten than the vessel that carries him. So that piece of wood, I don't know, let's say my headphones are made of wood. That's more rotten, even though it may look fancy and nice and expensive, even though my headphones are not expensive. But that thing is more rotten in their inner value and ability than that um, very cheaply made and very modest form of a boat people used thousands of years ago. So he, whoever he is, a heathen, calls upon a piece of wood more rotten than the vessel that carries him. For the hunger for profit planned it, and wisdom was the craftsman who built it. Your providence, O Father, guides it along, because even in the sea you gave a way, and even in the waves a sure path, showing that you can save out of every danger, that even a man without skill may put to sea. It is your will that the works of your wisdom should be not idle. Therefore, men also entrust their lives to a little piece of wood, and passing through the surge on a raft, come safely to land. So it is basically saying that because of God's grace and mercy, even heathens who don't know God, who don't call upon the Yahweh, who don't know Jesus, if they have any profit, any benefit, any blessing in life, it's because of God's mercy, not because of their idol. For in the old time also, when proud giants were perishing, the hope of the world taking refuge on a raft, right? Again, Genesis 6. Your hand guided the seed of generations of the race of man. For blessed is wood through which comes righteousness. Oh, even though this was written again before Jesus, this speaks prophetically in the future about the cross of Jesus. Again, verse 7, chapter 14. For blessed is wood through which comes righteousness. I know this is meant for Noah's Ark, but I'm seeing double fulfillment, right? As many biblical, well, some biblical prophecies, metaphors are also applied for more than just one instance. So in the same way, the author, it's almost like he expected or he knew. But even if he didn't, more blessed is the cross of Jesus as a piece of wood than Noah's Ark. But the idol made with hands is accursed itself and he that made it, because his was the working, and the corruptible thing was called a god with small g. For both the ungodly and his ungodliness are alike hateful to God. For truly the deed will be punished together with him who committed it. Therefore also there will be a visitation among the idols of the nation, because though formed of things which God created, they're made an abomination, stumbling blocks to the souls of man and a snare to the feet of the foolish. Basically, God provided the material, right? The wood. God created everything, and yet people choose to abuse what God gave to create something that is considered a sin, an abomination. There are different levels of sin. I know there are some Christians who don't believe they say, well, sin is sin. Well, yeah, in a way that we have to repent of all sin, yes, but there are different layers and different consequences for different sins. For the devising of idols was the beginning of fornication, and the invention of them the corruption of life. Again, before Genesis 6, idols didn't exist. This all comes as the consequence of the fall, not consequences of the fall of Adam and Eve in Genesis 3, but this is later. For they didn't exist from the beginning. Of course, because God, why would God create idols? And they won't exist forever. And I'll say amen. For by the vain pride of man they entered into the world, and therefore a speedy end was planned for them. For a father worn with untimely grief, making an image of the child quickly taken away. This is actually sad. So a father would make an image, maybe to resemble him, of a deceased child. Now honored him as a god, again with small g. He would honor the statue he made for his deceased child as a god. He would honor this token, this statue, this idol, which was then a dead man, and delivered to those that were under him mysteries and solemn rites. So that's double set. First you lose a child, and then you use that to step into an idolatry. Afterward, the ungodly custom, in process of time grown strong, was kept as a law, and the engraved images received worship by the commandments of princes. And when men could not honor them in presence because they lived far off, imagining the likeness from afar, they made a visible image of the king whom they honored, that by their zeal they might flatter the absent as if present. But worship was raised to a yet higher pitch, even by those who didn't know him, urged forward by the ambition of the architect. For he, wishing perhaps to please one in authority, used his art to force the likeness toward a greater beauty. So the multitude, allured by reason of the grace of his handiwork, now consider an object of devotion him that a little before was honored as a man. This is almost like deifying, well, not almost, this is trying to deify a dead person, or even a living person if it's a king, because you want to honor them, or you want to please them, or you want to do something to get their favor. And now this is when a human person receives adoration to the point of worship and idolatry, which was done, for example, with Caesar, right? This was done in the Roman Empire. And this became an ambush because man in bondage, either to calamity or to tyranny, invested stones and stocks with the incommunicable name is capital N. So this is God's name. Afterward, if it was not enough for them to go astray concerning the knowledge of God, but also while they live in a great war of ignorance, they call a multitude of evils peace. But that's not peace. For either slaughtering children in solemn rites or celebrating secret mysteries, now he's going back again to Canaanites, or holding frantic revels of strange ordinances, right? Like all these pagan occultic practices. No longer do they guard either life or purity of marriage, but one brings upon another either death by treachery or anguish by adultery. And all things confusedly are filled with blood and murder, theft and deception, corruption, faithlessness, perjury, confusion about what is good, forgetfulness of favors, ingratitude for benefits, defiling of souls, confusion of sex, disorder in marriage, adultery, and wantonness. For the worship of idols that may not be named is a beginning and cause and end of every evil. Have you heard this? I'll read again. Again, verse 27, chapter 14. For the worship of idols that may not be named is a beginning and cause and end of every evil. For their worshippers either make merry to madness. Man, the author was so good with words. For their worshippers either make merry to madness, or prophesy lies, or live unrighteously, or lightly commit perjury. For putting their trust in lifeless idols, when they have sworn a wicked oath, they expect not to suffer harm. But for both, the just doom will pursue them, because they had evil thoughts of God by giving heed to idols, and swore unrighteously in deceit through contempt for holiness. For it is not the power of them by whom men swear, but it is the just penalty for those who sin that always visit the transgression of the unrighteous. Sad passage, but also very powerful. And the author, this almost sounds like reading the Bible. I have to admit, it's so powerful. Again, I'm not proposing any work of Apocrypha to be on the same level as the Bible, like shoulder to shoulder in importance and significance, but I think it's important to read and know. Okay, when it comes to chapter 15, I will be reading verses 4 to 19. Okay, the same way chapter 13 reminds us of Romans 1. Tell me when I start reading Wisdom chapter 15, which passage of the New Testament it reminds you of. Okay, so chapter 15, verses 4 to 19. For we weren't led astray by any evil plan of man's, nor yet by painters, fruitless labor, a form stained with varied colors, the sight of which leads fools into lust. Their desires for the breathless form of a dead image. So the author is continuing talking about idols, right? But in my understanding, I see in my notes, now he's switching to the Egyptians. Okay. So their desires for the breathless form of a dead image, lovers of evil things, and worthy of such hopes, are those who make, desire, and worship them. For a potter needing soft earth laboriously molds each article for our service. He fashions out of the same clay both the vessels that minister to clean uses and those of a country sort, all in like manner. So does this remind you as another chapter in the book of Romans? What will be the use of each article of either sort? The potter is the judge. Also, laboring to an evil end, he molds a vain god out of the same clay. He who, having but a little before been made of earth, after a short space goes his way to the earth, out of which he was taken, when he is required to render back the soul which was lent him. So powerful. However, he has anxious care, not because his powers must fail, not because his span of life is short, but he compares himself with goldsmiths and silversmiths, and the imitators, and he imitates molders in brass, and esteems it glory that he molds counterfeits. So again, this is another book of Romans, chapter 9, and I think it will be doing ourselves a favor and reading Wisdom chapter 15 before we jump to conclusion that Romans chapter 9 God foreordained or elected in the eternity past some to perdition. I think we jump to that conclusion, and we should bite our tongue and go back and read some other biblical, specifically Old Testament passages that help us with the context, but also Wisdom chapter 15 helps us to understand when it comes to the potter So and I learned this in my Romans class. A lot of what Paul wrote, he didn't just invent. It came from his culture, from his studies. And when I say culture, yes, specifically Jews, but also what he also wrote it and taught sometimes align with the Greek and pagan philosophers. So what Paul said about the potter in Romans 9 is not the first time when someone used it. So unknown author of the Book of Wisdom used it. Um, I don't know what time was the book of Romans written, but if this came 50 years before Jesus, so that's easily 80 years before Paul wrote about a potter. This was mentioned in the book of Wisdom, and as we know, Paul was extremely well educated and well read person, so he knew about Jewish apocryphas. He must have known about this passage. Okay, again, back to the potter. His heart is ashes. His hope is of less value than earth. His life is of less honor than clay, because he was ignorant of him who molded him, and of him that inspired into him an active soul, and breathed into him a vital spirit. But he accounted our life to be a gain, and our lifetime a festival for profit. For he says one must get gain however one can, even if it is by evil. For this man beyond all others knows that he sins, out of earthly matter making brittle vessels and graven images. But most foolish and more miserable than a baby are the enemies of your people who oppress them, because they even considered all the idols of the nations to be gods, which have neither the use of eyes for seeing, nor nostrils for drawing breath, nor ears to hear, nor fingers for handling, and their feet are helpless for walking. For a man made them, and one whose own spirit is borrowed molded them. For no one has power as a man to mold a god like to himself. But being mortal, he makes a dead thing by the work of lawless hands. For he is better than the object of his worship, since he indeed had life, but they never did. Yes, and they worship the creatures that are most hateful. For being compared as to lack of sense, these are worse than all others. Neither as seen beside other creatures are they beautiful, so that one should desire them, but they have escaped both the praise of God and his blessing. Wow. So we see how futile is the work of a godless potter who chooses to use some of his vessels or most of his vessels for dishonorable usage, and that's to make idols. That's to put them to a disgraceful usage, right? So that he himself, or his customers, his friends, his family members will bow down and pray to these idols. Um, I think I will skip reading chapter 16, 17, and 18, even though I wanted to, but I can shortly summarize them. In these few chapters, God is judging the Egyptians and for their ungodly wicked practices. Some of them we mentioned, not just idolatry but also child sacrifices, um, chasing all these other gods, supposed gods, um, attacking God's people, uh, overall just staying for centuries in their wicked sins without seeing that God, Yahweh, the God of the Jews, the God of the Bible, is the one true God. Before they should have bowed down and worshiped him, but they didn't. So reading passages 16, 17, and 18 are powerful but also long, and I think I'll skip them, even though they have some passages which I thought I would be interested to be mentioned when it comes to gods and idols. Or, for example, I see in one verse Hades is mentioned. But again, I'm encourage all of you to get, if you don't want to spend money on a book like this one, and I can post Amazon link to this book so you can buy it. Just Google for most of these Apocrypha books are to be found online for free, so you can read them and enjoy them. And because I can skip the other chapters, maybe we can quickly go over some other books, even though I didn't plan to read them for tonight, but I think my throat is handling well or decent. So we may go a little bit over what I planned for tonight and do a little surprise by covering two other books. This will be two very short verses. It comes from another apocrypha called Sirach, I think, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. So the Book of Wisdom had an alternative name that was called Solomon's Wisdom. I'm sorry. So the Book of Wisdom was called alternatively the Wisdom of Solomon. So Wisdom of Solomon. But Sirach is differently known as Ecclesiasticus. So we have Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, but we also have Ecclesiasticus. And the same with the Book of Wisdom. With the Book of Wisdom, this is not in the Protestant Old Testament canon. And again, it's not recognized as divinely inspired by the Jewish believers, but it is still well respected and held as part of scriptures by the Catholics and Orthodox. So let's read two quick verses. Okay, let me give you first the intro. The wisdom of Ben Sira derives its title from the author Yeshua, or Jesus, son of Eliezer, son of Sira. This seems to be the earliest title of the book. The designation Liber Ecclesiasticus, meaning church book, appended to some Greek and Latin manuscripts, is perhaps due to the extensive use the church made of this book in presenting moral teaching to catechumens and to the faithful. The author, a sage who lived in Jerusalem, was thoroughly imbued with love for the wisdom tradition and also for the law, priesthood, temple, and divine worship. Written in Hebrew in the early years of the 2nd century BC, the book was finished by circa or about 175, so 175 BC. Okay, I just want to read two quick verses which to me were the most powerful again when it comes to the supernatural aspects. So we're not covering just any topic, right? Or any topics for tonight. We're just dealing with Apocrypha books, and I think I'll cover 3 instead of 1. But they have to do with something supernatural. So gods, demons, watchers, fallen gods, idols, things of that sort. When it comes to the book of Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, two quick verses. Chapter 16, verse 7. He, meaning God, he was not pacified toward the giants of all time, who revolted in their strength. Okay, again, this is a very short verse, a very short passage, but I'm glad how the author is mentioning giants here. So God was not pacified. God didn't want to just look with folded arms and like, oh, well, it is what it is. No, God wanted to intervene and punish these giants, this Nephilim, because they were an abomination. So God was not pacified toward the giants of all time, who revolted in their strength. And as we know, they were way more stronger than people. Not unbeatable, because David beat Goliath by using skill and wisdom, not strength. But still, there were, imagine if I'm 6 foot, imagine if someone comes that is maybe 8 or 9 foot tall. They're bigger, they're wider, their limbs are way stronger than mine. I would be scared too. And God decided to intervene. So I love that about God, because there's a point of time when it comes to every nation where He draws the line and says, no more, no more. And in chapter 17, even more powerful passage. So Sirach chapter 17, verse 17. He, God, He divided the nations of the whole earth. For every nation he appointed a ruler, but Israel is the Lord's portion. Now, we mentioned this passage so many times on our channel in the last 9 months since we began this channel. Um, one of the most important passages for us and for this channel is not just Genesis 6, it's not just Psalm 82, it's not just Paul dealing with these so-called thrones, dominions, authorities, powers, and so on, but it's also Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. In those passages, God says that God divided the earth and gave it as allotment to his sons. So these princes and principalities, who then later, as we read in the rest of the Old Testament, they rebelled and they didn't do their job well. So God decided to come in the council of these fallen beings, principalities, and judge them. And the author of the book of Sirach is confirming this so-called Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Again, if you check Deuteronomy 32 verses 8 and 9, this is what the author of Sirach in chapter 17 verse 17 says. God divided the nations of the whole earth. For every nation he appointed a ruler. So this cannot be a human ruler. This is not just a human ruler. Before even God dispersed people throughout the globe, God had all these principalities, spiritual beings. And in many times when you see an evil or a wicked human ruler, behind him there's even more wicked and evil spiritual principality that is working together with that ruler, which I think, well, I don't think I see easily it applies nowadays with all our wicked um, evil events in the world, led sometimes by the evil, powerful, well-known people. Could it be coincidence that some people come with such um, monstrous plans and schemes how to hurt others? No, it's usually because they're just encouraged by the evil power that is behind them to come up with such schemes. So he divided the nations of the whole earth. For every nation he appointed a ruler, but Israel is the Lord's portion. So while the other fallen principalities were above other nations, God chose to keep Jacob, which is, or the second name we use for Jacob is Israel, as his portion. And when other principalities fell and sin spread in the whole world, what is Jesus doing and what is the church doing through the gospel? Reclaiming the land, spreading the truth, bringing the light in this dark world, and reclaiming it back to God, to Jesus through the gospel, right? So Deuteronomy 32 is a very important passage if you're a believer in general, not just for tonight, not just for this topic, but in general, right? Hey, Sean, like the yes, like the lizard man in DC, something like that. Yeah. Okay, and the last book for tonight I didn't plan mentioning, but since we have time and my throat is doing well, we can mention a few passages from the book of Baruch, right? But let me give first some background when it comes to this. So this is another apocrypha for tonight. The opening verses ascribe the book to the well-known assistant to Jeremiah. It is a collection of 4 very different compositions, ending with a work entitled The Letter of Jeremiah, which circulated separately in major manuscripts of the Greek tradition. The original language may have been Hebrew, but only the Greek and other versions have been preserved. The setting is Babylon, where Baruch reads his scroll to King Jehoniah, I'm sorry, I can't read this well, and the exiles. They react by sending gifts and the scroll to Jerusalem, presumably by the hand of Baruch. No certain date can be given for the book, but it may have been edited in final form during the last 2 centuries before Christ. Okay, so I'll be reading only from 3 chapters. It's actually a very short book. So let me read from chapter 3, verses 26 to 28. Okay. They were the giants born that were famous of old, great of stature, and expert in war. God didn't choose these, nor did he give the way of knowledge to them. So they perished because they had no wisdom. They perished through their own foolishness. So, very short 3 verses, but they remind me, well, not just of Genesis 6, but they just remind me also what was happening later in the books of Judges, and also when after Moses, when they're about Israel was about to enter into the land of Canaan. So we see all these atrocities, we see all these tribes of giants. So uh, I love how, in a spiritual way, this confirms, because it says God didn't choose these. Whom? God didn't choose giants. And it says great of stature and experts in war. It just reminds me of the rest of the Bible when God says how he doesn't see how people see. God looks at the heart. So God chose the small ones. God chose the irrelevant small tribe of Israel. God chose in the same fashion King David, who then defeated Goliath. So God's logic is very different than our logic, and I love that. And I'll read this passage again because it's so important. It's very short. These were the giants born that were famous of old, great of stature, and expert in war. God didn't choose these, nor did he give the way of knowledge to them. So God decided to hide some stuff from the giants because they were an abomination. Read the book of Enoch, but also the book of giants, which is, I wouldn't dare to say that's considered apocrypha. That's not even considered apocrypha, but it's still interesting to learn when it comes to context of the giants and some additional information. Of course, you wouldn't take it as inspired, divinely inspired word of God, but still it will be beneficial for your studies. So they perished because they had no wisdom. So they had knowledge. That's not the same as wisdom. Wisdom is a gift from God, but they sought no wisdom. Because if they sought wisdom, we know that they will be following God. They'll be following God's laws. They will be loving God, yielding to God. But no, they chose to turn their back on God, devour and attack humans, and just be involved in everything that is wicked. They had no wisdom, so they perished through their own foolishness. Chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. You were sold to the nations, but not for destruction. Because you moved God to wrath, you were delivered to your adversaries. So this is in the context when God, throughout the times, he would give his own people to their enemies so they can learn the lesson, repent, and come back. So, for example, we know that this happened with Babylonians or Assyrians. So in this context, the author Baruch is saying, you, so who you? The Hebrews, the Israelites, you were sold to the nations as slaves, right? But not for destruction, because God doesn't forget us even when we sin and separate ourselves from him. This is beautiful. Because you move God to wrath, and God has to deal with sin, right? You are delivered to your adversaries. For you provoke him that made you. And how did they provoke God? By sacrificing to demons and not to God. And as I mentioned already in tonight's episode, uh, the Jews, whenever they kept following in idolatry and different sort of sin, first the Egyptians, and then I mentioned also Canaanites, God always had to deal with them harsh because they were supposed to be different than the rest of the planet. They were supposed to follow God, not be perfect, but by following God and walking in his commandments, to be perfected by spending time with him, to be different, to be changed, and to radiate his holiness and his presence to other people. So this is similar to us as God's people, as the church today. I know that we fail. I know that I fail. Um, so just be reminded not to forget God. And even if you sin, not to turn to other gods or idols, but to always come back in repentance, knowing that as long as there's breath in your lungs, there's still uh, God's love for you. There's still chance for you to come and repent and enjoy God's presence, and He will not condemn you for your past sins if you honestly repent for these. So God had to deal with rebuke and scolding of His own people whenever they turned to idols. If you read the Old Testament, you should know that this was one of the biggest things, that God was not willing to turn His back or turn the blind eye. If His people forgot Yahweh and switched even for a season to other gods and idols, God took this seriously. God took this seriously because by doing this, they already broke one of the most important and biggest commandments God gave them. Imagine you're a father or a mother and you do everything for your child and they turn out hating you, not wanting to talk to you, not wanting to spend time with you. It's not about what they can do for you, but it's that they don't want to even, they act like as your enemies, as you didn't birth them, you didn't give them life. So of course, in that sense, it has to be taken as personal. And because of God's love, He doesn't just chastise us and rebukes us. He does it for the point of us coming back to Him, because He desires to have this personal, loving union with us, and that cannot happen if sin is between us. So this is beautiful. I mean, it sucks they had to be taken by other countries as slaves, but it's also encouraging for us because God, even in their suffering, God never forgets His people, which again is a reminder for us that God doesn't forget us in our suffering. And the last chapter in this last book for tonight is chapter 6. Okay, I have a lot of verses to read, but I like how Baruch in this last chapter, he basically mocks these idols and false gods because they're basically unable to do anything, because again they don't exist. I mean, gods exist, but in this context it's idols. So idols that craftsmen would make them and think they're gods. So no, these idols do not represent gods, and there's nothing that they can do. So that reminds me of Elijah when he was mocking Baal. Okay, so Baruch chapter 6, verses 4 to 17. But now will you see in Babylon gods of silver and of gold and of wood, borne upon shoulders, which cause the nations to fear. Beware, therefore, that you in no wise become like to the strangers. Neither let fear take hold upon you because of them. So, because of gods, not because of people. When you see the multitude before them and behind them, worshiping them. But say you in your hearts, O Lord, we must worship you. For my angel is with you, and I myself do care for your souls. For their tongue is polished by the workman, and they themselves are overlaid with gold and with silver. Yet they yet are they but false and can't speak. And taking gold as it were for a virgin that loves to be happy, they make crowns for the heads of their gods. And sometimes also the priests convey from their gods gold and silver and bestow it upon themselves. And will even give thereof to the common prostitutes. And they deck them as men with garments, even the gods of silver and gods of gold and of wood. Yet can these gods save themselves from rust and moths, though they can be covered with purple raiment? They wipe their faces because of the dust of the temple, which is thick upon them. And he that can't put to death one that offends against him holds a scepter, as though he were judge of a country. He has also a dagger in his right hand and an axe, but can deliver himself from war and robbers, whereby they are known not to be gods. Therefore fear them not. For like as a vessel that a man uses is nothing worth when it is broken, Even so it is with their gods. When they be set up in the temples, their eyes be full of dust through the feet of those who come in. Now, verses 23 to 59. Whereby you may know that they are no gods, therefore fear them not, notwithstanding the gold with which they are beset to make them beautiful. Except one wipe off the rust, they will not shine, for not even when they are molten did they feel it. Things wherein there is no breath are bought at any cost. Having no feet, they are borne upon shoulders. So this repeats what the author already said, whereby they declare to men that they be nothing worth. They also that serve them are ashamed. For if they fall to the ground at any time, they can't rise up again of themselves. Neither, if they're bowed down, can they make themselves straight. Again, like the statue of the Dagon, which I mentioned maybe like 40 minutes ago or something like that. But the offerings are set before them as if they were dead men. And the things that are sacrificed to them, their priests sell and spend. And in like manner, their wives also lay up part thereof in salt. But to the poor and to the impotent, they will give nothing thereof. The menstruous woman and the woman in childbed touch their sacrifices. Knowing therefore by these things there are no gods, fear them not. For how they can be called gods? Because women set meat before the gods of silver, gold, and wood. And in their temples the priests sit on seats, having their clothes tore, and their heads and beards shaven, and nothing upon their heads. They roar and cry before their gods, as men do at the feast when one is dead. The priests also take off garments from them and clothe their wives and children with, I don't know how to pronounce this word, widal. Whether it be evil that one does to them or good, they're not able to recompense it. They can neither set up a king nor put him down. In like manner, they can neither give riches nor money. Though a man makes a vow to them and keep it not, they will never exact it. They can save no man from that, neither deliver the weak from the mighty. They can't restore a blind man to his sight, but Jesus can. Nor deliver any that is in distress. They can show no mercy to the widow, but Jesus can. Nor do good to the fatherless. They're like the stones that be hewn out of the mountain, these gods of wood that are overlaid with gold and with silver. Those who minister to them will be confounded. How should a man then think or say that they're gods, even when the Chaldeans themselves dishonor them? So if the other heathens are dishonoring the statues and idols and thinking that's rubbish, it's not God, and how much more should we see them as nothing? Who, if they will see one mute that can speak, they bring him and entreat him to call upon Baal as though he were able to understand. But Jesus can heal this, both mute and blind, right? Yet they can perceive this themselves and forsake them, for they have no understanding. The women also with cords about them sit in the ways, burning brand for incense. But in any of them drawn by some that passes by, lie with him, she reproaches her fellow that she was not taught as worthy as herself, nor her cord broken. Whatever is done among them is false. How should a man then think or say that they are gods? They're fashioned by carpenters and goldsmiths. And by the way, I just want to say this because we talk a lot about fallen gods, which again Paul calls us principalities, powers, thrones, dominions, authorities, and whatnot. So this is not negating the existence of other gods with small g, okay? Because we already read that Sirach is confirming that the other nations were put under the authority of other uh, beings. This is not going against that. This is just saying that if I create this bottle of water and want to pray to it, this thing is not God. So it's not, don't think this as a paradox or a contradiction. It's simply saying that what people create, that's not God, it's an idol. But it's not negating the existence of the fallen principalities and powers who used to be in God's service, God's sons, who are now spread out throughout the globe and called as gods. But they do exist. They're evil powers. Okay. And they themselves that fashioned them can never continue long. How then should the things that are fashioned by them? For they have left the lies and reproaches to those who come after. For when there comes any war or plague upon them, the priests consult with themselves where they can be hidden with them. How then can't men understand that they be no gods, which can neither save themselves from war nor from plague? Um, and again, in Daniel 10, angels and archangel come and say to Daniel they were waging war for weeks with the god of Persia, and then Greece is mentioned later. So these principalities, these fallen powers, these fallen gods, they do exist, and they're able to wage war. They're engaged in spiritual warfare. But these are idols. They cannot do absolutely nothing. So which can neither save themselves from war nor from plague. So that's not what, for example, like I said in the book of Daniel, chapter 10, is happening. They're real fallen gods, and then there are these false idols. For seeing they be but of wood and overlaid with gold and with silver, it will be known hereafter that they are false, and it will be manifest to all nations and kings that there be no gods, but the works of men's hands, and that there is no work of God in them. For then, who then may not know that there are no gods? For neither can they set up a king in a land, nor give rain to man. Neither can they judge their own cause, nor redress a wrong, being unable, for they are as crows between heaven and earth. For even when fire falls upon the house of gods of wood, or overlaid with gold, or with silver, their priests will flee away and escape, but they themselves will be burned apart like beams. Moreover, they can't withstand any king or enemies. How should a man then allow or think that they be gods? Neither are those gods of wood and overlaid with silver or with gold able to escape either from thieves or robbers. I'm almost done. Whose gold and silver and garments with which they're clothed, their strong will take from them. That they that are strong will take from them and go away, neither will they be able to help themselves. Therefore, it is better to be a king that shows his manhood, or else a vessel in a house profitable for that whereof the owner will have need, than such false gods. Or even a door in a house to keep the things safe that be therein, than that such false gods. Or a pillar of wood in a palace, than that such false gods. I mean, can you see the sarcasm and the mockery? Like it's either better to be a door in a house than a false god, not just false principality which used to serve God but rebel, but again something like this or like this that people fashion and make and suddenly start worshiping and praying to. So it's better even to be a door because you have purpose. But if you're idle, you have no purpose. You have no purpose. Last few verses and I'm done. Verses 64 to 73 in the same chapter. Why a man should neither think nor say that they are gods, seeing they are able neither to judge causes nor to do good to man. Knowing therefore that there are no gods, fear them not. For they can neither curse nor bless kings, neither they can show signs in the heavens among the nations, nor shine as the sun, nor give light as the moon. As the beasts are better than they, so the beast, even a scary one, even the one that is a predator, like they say hyena or a wolf or a lion, they're much better because they're walking their purpose than an idol. The beasts are better than they, for they can get under a covert and help themselves. In no wise then is it manifest to us that they are gods. Therefore fear them not. I like how the author is constantly saying, fear them not, fear them not, fear them not. But when you're dealing with the fallen principalities um, and those that used to serve God, but are now just dominions, powers, principalities, thrones, the way to not fear them and fight them is to call upon the name of Jesus. So I just want you to remember that. For as a scarecrow in a garden of cucumbers that keeps nothing, so are their gods of wood, and overlaid with gold and with silver. Likewise, also their gods of wood, and overlaid with gold and with silver, are like to a white thorn in an orchard, and every bird sits upon, that every bird sits upon, as also to a dead body that is cast out into the dark. And you will know them to be no gods by the bright purple that rots upon them. And they themselves afterward will be consumed and will be a reproach in the country. Better therefore is the just man that has none idols, for he will be for far from reproach. So this is a lesson to all of us. Don't have idols. Repent if you have idols. Seek God, seek his wisdom, seek his help, healing, um, any sort of a blessing that you need. Don't go to shamans, don't go to astrologers, don't go to gods and idols. Don't go to charlatans that will take your money and deceive you. And you will be also, not just that you won't get help, not just that you'll end up hurt, but you'll also sin and be even more distance from God. But see God and don't be afraid of these statues, idols, or fallen gods. Think of Jesus. And also buy this book. There's tons of it has more than 15 books, I think 17, something like that. Um, close to 500 pages. I'm glad I bought it. Again, these books and passages of Apocrypha are included in the canons of the Catholic Bible and the Eastern Orthodox Bible. This is the 2018 edition. If you buy 2022 edition, you'll get more Old Testament Apocrypha, and you'll get some New Testament books which were not included, with good reason, to the New Testament canon. Either way, be encouraged to study, to read and study Apocrypha, because it's been a blessing to me. Like I said, yesterday at work, I covered about 60 pages from 4 of these books of Apocrypha. The last one was Tobit, but I don't have time or energy to cover that one. I'll leave it for next time. Trust me, many times when you read these Apocrypha books, you will see not just the works of the prophets, but also the apostles, and even some of Jesus's words, wisdom, sayings, uh, commandments also that he gave to people. And you'll see, you'll not create, hopefully, some conspiracy theory, how this was stolen from whatever. But you should see that this actually comes, the Bible doesn't come from a vacuum. comes from this culture that taught a certain way, had so many similarities, but also differences with their neighboring pagan nations. So, in that context, the canon of the Bible came to be, but the Jews were still unique because they always had God who was guiding them and who did not want to leave Israel under the guidance of the other principalities, like we quoted in Deuteronomy 32. He kept Israel for himself. So this is why the Jews were different. They were in many ways similar to other people, but they had different laws and different God. So in that tradition, if you're a Protestant like me, and you may think nothing happened in those 400 years between the two testaments, well, I want to encourage you to think differently. Start reading these books, you'll be blessed. You don't have to quote them as they're bounding to you in your Christian walk, but you can just see a lot of beauty. For example, when I was reading about wisdom, how wisdom is capitalized with capital W, how wisdom was always with God, and how people without wisdom perish, and how godly people have wisdom, and how wisdom was always there with God through the creation. It's like you're reading the book of Proverbs. It's amazing. The book of wisdom reminds me of the book of Proverbs and some other portions of the New Testament so much. And also, when you read about wisdom, which is personalized as a metaphor given as a feminine character, both in the Bible and here in Apocrypha, do not think as Jehovah Witness used to think. Well, they still think that, for example, Proverbs 8 is referring to Jesus because wisdom at one point was made. So they're like, oh, see, this is Jesus. He was made. No, wisdom is personified intentionally as a wise woman. And then it always says she for the wisdom. So the same thing, the same pattern is followed by many authors of Apocrypha. And I think this will be everything for tonight. I covered, oh my gosh, almost hour and 30. I hope you enjoyed. This is just the beginning. I will eventually cover some other books where I find supernatural aspects, again, when it comes to demons, watchers, gods, idols, giants, whatever I think that may be interesting for the channel when it comes to the supernatural aspect. And I will try to parallel it with the Bible, and in the future do more episodes when it comes to the Apocrypha. And again, I will be posting a link for the Amazon book so you can get this one. It's not expensive, or you can just Google and read these books for free. This was, I think, the 40th episode of this year when it comes to the I'm not counting those short episodes, or they're not even episodes, they're videos that I did by myself. They're like less than 30 minutes, or videos which I'm cutting, which are short videos that represent full sessions. No, this is the 40th episode when it comes to those longer episodes. We'll have one more episode in this year. Next Sunday, we'll be back. We'll be welcoming back Dane. His episode, the episode when he came on the channel, was the most is still the most popular one. We have over 1,000 views for that one. And what we did was simply reading modern eyewitness accounts of many, horror encounters and events that people throughout the North America had with different supernatural creatures, such as Bigfoot or Mothman or whatever. So we will be welcoming back Dane next Sunday, and that will be the last episode, the 41st one for this year. I hope you are starting to enjoy the channel as much as I am, or even if it is a bit less, but it's still that you'll be subscribing, sharing, liking, because that helps. That honestly helps the channel a lot. We're not making any money. I'm not making any money. I'm just spending, but I love it and I'm not complaining. So yeah, like, subscribe. I shall see you next Sunday with Dane. It will be probably the same time, 7 p.m., where we'll be talking, commenting, and just having fun with more paranormal activities. And that is all for this year. And again, I'm sorry that we keep postponing the episode on the Atlantis. I have to respect when my guests are busy because they also sacrifice their time. I'm not paying them to come on the channel. And yeah, may God bless you. Merry Christmas once again. The only reason I was able to do this episode was my people celebrate Christmas on January the 7th, and I'm also not big when it comes to, I don't know, birthdays, festivities, holidays, not because I want to be grumpy or because I'm legalistic. I don't think it's sinful at all. It's just that that was never part so much of my personality or growing up. So I chose rather to do something I like, and I think it can educate and help people if they learn than just, enjoy a nice meal or a dinner, which I'm not against. But I also wanted to keep, quote unquote, spoiling the audience by having the episode every Sunday. So that was all for tonight. Yeah, please like, subscribe, share this material, and we'll be covering more Apocrypha in the future. Merry Christmas. God bless. Thank you.